So communication, that's pretty easy. Communication is just transmitting a message from a sender to a receiver. So what's hard about that? That's where it gets interesting, because there's more than just the message. There's more than just my words going from me to the receiver. The receiver has to also accept those, right? They have to receive that information, so it has to be in a form that is receivable. That's easy enough. I'm speaking to you, you're able to receive this information, but there's so much more to that when you add culture in. Communication is so much more than words. There's spoken words and there's written words, but then there's also some paramessages in there. Paramessages are our body language, our tone of voice, the cadence that we're speaking, the rhythm. So many little pieces in there that go into the actual message, and those things you don't even think about. You're thinking so much about the words when you speak and the message that you're trying to get across that you're not thinking about what is your face saying, what is your tone saying. Those are unconscious. But 55% of what we say is our body language. It's not the words at all. So 55% is what my face is saying to you. When we lived in Peru, the girls that worked on our teaching team used to laugh at my husband because they said Billy talked with his face, that his whole face talked. And we were like, what are they talking about? But in that culture, they don't use the facial expressions in the same way we do. And they would laugh because his eyebrows would move a whole lot when he talked. And they don't use that. And so they thought it was hysterical that his face would move. In fact, they said his face was dancing when he talked. So 55% of his message was coming out of his facial expression. So if his face was saying he was happy, he was excited, whatever it was saying, they were receiving that along with the words. And then there's 38% of your communication is coming out of your tone, out of the cadence, out of the rhythm that I said just a minute ago. For example, we used to work in a village, a Quechua village. They sounded like they were angry all the time. And I couldn't speak Quechua, so all I was receiving was not the words they were saying, was not the message they were saying. I was receiving the tone of voice. So the tone of voice was sounded from my cultural perspective, angry, sounded aggressive, sounded, I don't even know how to explain it, but all I could receive was, why are these people angry at me? Years later, as I started to understand the culture and understand the communication style and the people and the words and the language, I started to see that it's just culture. It's just the way that they speak. Whereas another tribe of Quechua people spoke very sing-song. They were very la-da-da-da-da, and their cadence had this bouncy, dancing rhythm to it, and they always sounded like they were super happy. Well, from my culture, who am I going to be most drawn to? The people that sound super happy, right? Because I can't understand the words, but I can understand the tone of voice. So the super happy sounded much more appealing to me. The very last piece of communication, 7%, only 7%, are the words that are coming out of our mouth, are the actual words. So it's so important to understand the body language, the facial expressions, all of those paramessages actually make up way more communication than what we're saying. So in cross-cultural communication, what's coming across from us? 93% of what we're saying is coming across in our face, it's coming across in our body, and it's coming across in our tone. Only 7% of what's coming across is the actual language. Now, do not hear me say that language isn't important and language learning isn't important. It's very important if we're going to get our message across fully. But those other pieces are language learning and they are culture learning. And if you aren't paying attention to the paramessages, you're missing out on 93% of language learning. So if 93% of our communication is coming through paramessages and only 7% is coming through the spoken word, that means that our most important senses in communication are visual and auditory. So we're reading someone's face, we're reading what's happening on their body and what's happening around us, and we're listening to what's happening. We're not only saying things to them and we're not only receiving things from them, but our eyes are constantly scanning for what's happening to their face, to their body language, and we feed off of that. So that's one of the reasons when we first go into a new culture, it's so much easier to understand things if we're face to face with someone, because we're catching all of those pieces. The telephone is one of the hardest things when we're learning language and we're learning to communicate cross-culturally, because what's the only thing we're hearing? We're only getting the words. We're only hearing what's being said to us, but we're missing 93% of communication. We're missing the facial cues. We're missing the body language. We're missing all those other pieces. So when we go out into a culture, it's so important to be able to have all of that to get 100%. Will we ever get 100%? We're not actually from that culture, but we can get closer and closer the more we learn. And the more we use those observation skills and those auditory skills to be able to observe what's happening and to be able to feed off of it and read from it.